Hello and welcome back to another Blu-ray review. Thank you for all the comments on the past couple of videos. People seem to be enjoying the new format. Not getting many views, but at least the comments I'm getting are kind of really positive, and it seems like you guys are enjoying the new form that I'm taking with the channel and with these reviews in general. Let's just dive right into this one, which is another Eureka release. And I talked about this in the October announcements video, and I was a bit like, well, yeah, kind of, but I'm really glad that this came through the letterbox. Let's put it that way. Karloff in Maniacal Mayhem. It's a 3-movie pack. Just came out from Eureka. Perfect for the Halloween spooky season in a way. And we're going to get to that, just how much these films for me really qualify as horror movies. And I debated whether or not doing all 3 of these in one video or doing separate reviews of each film. Let's just do a bumper one. I mean, I ramble on like a motherfucker anyway, so let's just get right into it and start talking about these 3 films that all star the legendary Boris Karloff. All I'll say right from the very beginning here is that I'm now a fan of Boris Karloff. I always liked him in Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, and The Black Cat. I liked him. I find him really interesting as an actor. I just hadn't seen enough to say, like, I'm a Boris Karloff fan. Now I've seen these 3, which are 3 very different performances. I'm all in on Boris Karloff. I want to go back now and get the other 2 releases that Eureka have done of many of his movies. So I'm in now for Boris Karloff. Let's get talking about these films right away. I'll take off the nice slip cover, give you a look actually first. This is imagery from the first film, The Invisible Ray, which we'll talk about in just a second. But a very nice slip cover. I like the color design on this one too. Very, very nice. And on the front, we do have the poster for the first one we'll be talking about, which is The Invisible Ray. This is a really fun film. I love the setup and premise of this one. So this film came out in 1936. And, you know, the title of the release, Maniacal Mayhem, it is kind of themed around people going mad or crazy antagonists slash protagonists, or tweeners as we call them in the world of wrestling, where they're not quite a hero, not quite a villain. There's some moral kind of gray areas in some of these films. But The Invisible Ray is about this scientist played by Boris Karloff called Dr. Janos Rook. And Rook has made a discovery by looking into the far reaches of the universe to another galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy to be precise, and he's been able to detect a different kind of radiation than he's ever seen on Earth in the Andromeda Galaxy. But also he's been able to somehow, and they don't really explain this, but it's kind of cool to imagine that this would be possible. He's able to view basically a light beam that has come from Andromeda, viewing us from millions of years ago, and he's able to see a meteor that crashes in Africa. Which potentially holds this radiation, this new element that he could use for, you know, also this is going to be a scientific breakthrough for this character. He invites some of his peers who he's not particularly friendly with, but it's a huge discovery, and they begrudgingly admit, having seen his demonstration, that there's something to this. So they all agree to go to Africa to try and find this radiation, this new element. And he kind of separates himself early on in the expedition in Africa. He goes off with some guides and he ends up finding this element, but he separates himself from the rest of the group, including his young wife. You know, she's a younger woman than him, and it's kind of hinted at that she married him more out of obligation to her father, who was close with Rook. But there is an age-appropriate love interest for her back at the camp, and so she kind of gets drawn away, especially as her husband is so obsessed with his work that he just doesn't come back to base camp. So he is now obsessed with this element that he has found, and it's very powerful, but he becomes poisoned by it. And there's this brilliant effect that they've done. It's rotoscoping, basically, and, you know, frame by frame, people have gone in and animated the kind of glow effect on his face and fingers. But he's effectively now dying because of this radiation. And he goes to one of the scientists who came along on the trip, who is played by Bela Lugosi. And this character's name is Dr. Bennett. And Bennett ends up devising this antidote, which can kind of stave off the kind of deadly effects of the radiation. But Rook will essentially have to take this for the rest of his life. But Bennett realizes as well that this is affecting his brain and that Rook is kind of going a bit power crazy with it. And he is obsessed with the destructive capabilities of this radiation, which they eventually call Radium X. And Bennett sees more of the potential for using it for good and for healing. And so he ends up taking the discovery back to Paris with him and kind of being like, well, you know, I'll credit Dr. Rook for finding it, but I'm branding it. I'm calling it Radium X. I'm healing people, presumably for a price. So Bennett, in a way, is kind of the good guy of the film, kind of not. You know, it's kind of a bit grimy what he does, but also you understand where he's coming from, because literally there's a scene in the film where Rook is like, I could destroy cities in an instant. You know, cities will crumble, you know, with the power of this ray. So he's kind of harnessed it into this machine that is the invisible ray, essentially. He uses it to like dissolve this huge boulder across the way from his tent. And so you see kind of its destructive capabilities. So then we go to Paris, and now Rook is like on the warpath, and he says like, you've taken my wife away from me because she's gone off with this younger guy, and you've now stolen my discovery from me. Like you've taken everything from me. And I think they mentioned like later on in the film that he did get the Nobel Prize for it, but that's, for him, it's, you know, his kind of his obsession, this thing that he's been spending so long looking out for in the skies, in the stars, has now been taken away from him, being used by someone else. And so he goes back to Paris and essentially starts tracking down all the members of the expedition, and one by one taking them out, because his radiation sickness makes him deadly to the touch. He discovers this early on when he pets a dog and the dog just dies instantly. That's why he needs the antidote, so that he doesn't become this kind of deadly menace, I suppose. But then he owns that and uses that to become this killer. And so that's kind of the main kind of thrust of the third act of the film, is Rook coming back to Paris and seeking revenge on the people who have done him wrong. I really loved the story of this one. I thought Boris Karloff's performance was great. I really felt the conflict within him. I could see how, and I like how they mentioned that it affects his brain, because it makes him a bit more sympathetic than just this guy who's crazy about destroying things, you know. And he looks cool when he comes back to Paris. Like, he's a cool looking villain with the hats and the trench coat and everything, and the way he kind of he kind of sidles up to people and very menacingly, but kind of smoothly and suavely kind of stalks his prey. It's a really good performance by him. And Bela Lugosi plays the straight man, which is a really interesting kind of I don't know, novelty for me, because I'm always used to him kind of being a little bit more over the top, but he's a very straight-laced kind of stoic character. Very good performance, I think. One thing I can't shake off, though, is that he looks so much like a young Robert De Niro to me. Like, there's just certain little facial expressions he pulls. I mean, look at it. Tell me that doesn't remind you of Robert De Niro. There's just something about him in certain moments, certain lights, certain expressions where I just see a young Robert De Niro. I don't know what it is. And it's a bit distracting sometimes. I love seeing Beulah Bondi pop up in this. She's an actress that I love in many films. You know, It's a Wonderful Life, Make Way for Tomorrow. I think she's a fantastic actress, and they mentioned the audio commentary. She is kind of wasted in this film because she's such a good actress, and has a fairly small part to play. The actor who plays the young man who takes away Rook's wife, who, you know, he's a nice character. He's a sympathetic character. Like, the way that they play off this romance with Rook's wife, it's not like he's kind of, you know, stealing her away from Dr. Rook. He falls in love with her, and he's like, well, I can't see you now. Like, he's aware of the fact that it's a wrong thing to do. And to be fair to her, she only makes that relationship official once she believes that her husband, Rook, is dead. But the actor who plays him, Frank Lawton, there's this bit towards the end where they're essentially setting a trap for Rook at this big mansion. And, you know, he's coming to kill them all, right? And so it's a tense situation. And this guy comes up to him and he's just like, sir, your wife is very nervous. And he goes, yes, so am I.
My wife?
In her room with Mrs. Noy, as you desired. But she's nervous, sir.
So am I.
And it's like, it's one of the weirdest line deliveries, because, like, again, someone is going to, like, come to kill you and your wife. And, you know, it's like, yeah. It's very exciting. Like, he didn't say that, but it's like, you know, your wife is nervous. Yeah, so am I. And then, like, the guy's like, well, one way or the other, you know, we'll find out what's going to happen. And he's like, yeah, one way or the other. And he has a little chuckle at the end. Like, it's such a weird, it makes it like it doesn't fit. in the movie, because then the next time you see him, he rushes up and he sees Rook there, and he's looking scared as you would. You know, it's just this weird little moment in the film where it's just like, yeah, so am I. It's really weird. It was directed by Lambert Hillier, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was a good, and again, you know, horror film or not, it kind of is, kind of isn't. It's more of a science fiction thriller, I suppose. And then, you know, they talk about the commentary about is this a universal horror film or not, and that kind of thing. And then they talk about that with the other two films as well. But I just really enjoyed the story, maybe more than the execution at times. But I think Karloff was genuinely great. There's a lovely scene with his mother. His mother's a really interesting character, and I could talk about the film for a lot longer, but we don't want to sit here literally all day. But you know, he's talking about how this thing has the power to destroy, you know, the power to heal. It's a very powerful thing. And they also mention in the commentary, which is a very interesting point, is that this kind of predates how, you know, radiation would be seen and used in the world for destructive properties and for healing properties. Radiotherapy, the atom bomb. This is like decades before that. So it's a very prescient film in that sense, because it's kind of dealing with the atomic age stuff before the atomic age. And I never really considered that, which is one of the great things about having these commentaries and kind of you know, pieces on Blu-rays where you can kind of go, oh yeah, interesting. That is a good point that I never considered. So that definitely adds a unique element to the film. But there's a lot of like spinning newspaper headlines that fill in a lot of gaps of the stuff. But I wasn't expecting it to go from like this gorgeous Gothic castle in Carpathia to Africa and then Paris. You know, it's kind of a globe-trotting kind of movie. But I really enjoyed it. Would definitely watch it again. So The Invisible Ray.
I leave my secret with you. It is all there. More power than man has ever possessed. Power to heal. Power to destroy.
Definitely gets a thumbs up from me. So the next film in the set is from 1940. So we jump ahead 4 years. And this one is, and we kind of have a reversible sleeve on the Blu-ray, which is very nice if you want to flip them around, and you know, whichever poster artwork you favor, you can put on the other side, and it has the spine. So this is Black Friday. So this is, again, less a horror movie, and it's more of a like science fiction gangster movie, which is like, what? You know, it's a strange one. It was a very strange one. It feels like a Twilight Zone episode to me, Black Friday. So the plot of this film follows Boris Karloff, who plays a scientist again, but a very different kind of scientist, and he looks like almost 20 years older than he did in The Invisible Ray. But he's more of a collected and sane scientist who is also kind of very amoral and completely out for his own gain against, you know, what most people would consider to be a very horrific thing to do to someone who's a friend of yours. Not even a friend, to do to anyone. What he ends up doing is really despicable, but he's doing it for personal gain, but also for scientific, you know, discovery. And so you can almost see the scientific discovery side of it, pushing the boundaries and kind of playing outside the box. But there's also the totally despicable thing where he uses it for potential personal gain. So his character's name is Ernest Sovak, and at the beginning of the film, he's on death row, and he hands over his notes to there's the one reporter who he said treated him fairly in the press. So this reporter's been given his notes, and that's how we flash back and tell the story of the movie. And it starts when Sovak's friend, a professor of English called George Kingsley, he gets run over by a mobster, gets into an accident at the beginning of the film. This mobster's name is Red Cannon, and Sovak goes back to the hospital with both of them in the ambulance. And the mobster, Red Cannon, he is paralyzed from the neck down, whereas George Kingsley is in a coma. So he makes the very split second, you know, spur of the moment decision to do a brain transplant, an unsolicited, like shady backdoor brain transplant. He takes the brain of this mobster and he puts it into his friend's head, right? And so when his friend is then convalescing and, you know, he's at home saying, you know, I always thought that convalescing would be like a holiday, you know, but I find I'm not interested in doing anything, and I'm just low and down. And Sovak's like, what you really need to do is go to New York, because he knew that Red Cannon was a New York mobster. And Red Cannon had revealed to Sovak that he has a lot of money stashed away. So, you know, that's where it's up to you to decide how much from one side really is Sovak doing this. Is it A, to keep his friend alive and to see if a brain transplant was possible? And he does talk later on about how like this changes everything with medicine, that it's possible to do a brain transplant. But he is also very much interested in this money to the extent that he then takes Kingsley to the hotel that Red Cannon used to frequent, and the very room as well. And he's trying to bring the Red Cannon side of his brain out, which he successfully manages to do. And so Stanley Ridges gives this phenomenal dual performance where he is the kind of, you know, the not frail, but, you know, he's got some old age makeup, and he's, you know, Professor Kingsley, kind of mild mannered, kind of, you know, well liked professor of English, and you know, he quotes poetry and things like that. But then when he becomes Red Cannon, you know, he kind of, the hair slicks back and turns kind of, you know, slick black. And now he looks like a complete, you know, you can tell this is the same actor, but the demeanor is different. The look is different. Now he's this mobster, you know, he's this gangster, he's Red Cannon. And it's a great performance. And a hugely interesting piece of trivia here is that the roles were completely different before the film. Like literally within days of this film going into production, Boris Karloff was meant to play George Kingsley. He was going to do the dual role, the kind of Jekyll and Hyde, you know, George Kingsley, Red Cannon. But what happened was, days before the film was about to be shot, Boris Karloff said, "Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll play the I'll play the you know, the doctor, the surgeon, the scientist, Ernest Sovak." And there's debate over why he did this. They talk about that in the audio commentary, and Jonathan Rigby kind of says that, you know, in my eyes, I think he just couldn't be asked. And that's a literal quote. He's like, you know, people say that Boris Karloff thought that it would be too demanding to do a dual role, that they would, you know, he wouldn't be up to it as an actor. But apparently he had done kind of dual roles before. And so he believes that he just couldn't be bothered to do that much work, basically. But what threw things out of whack then was that Bela Lugosi was set to play Sovak. And the name itself kind of lends itself to a Hungarian, I suppose. And so, you know, you're going to have Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff in this kind of, you know, two, you know, very close characters throughout the entire movie. But then it gets changed to the point where, well, where does Bela Lugosi go? Because he's not going to play this dual role, because I guess they thought he wasn't good enough of an actor to pull it off. And he gets relegated to being one of the mobsters, Marne. And it's a very minor part in the film. I don't think he even comes into contact with Boris Karloff in any scenes. And so that's just a fascinating thing to me, that the whole cast was reshuffled, and Stanley Ridges gets subbed in at the last minute and just absolutely kills the entire movie. Like, I'm watching these films with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, and in the final film, which we'll talk about very soon, Charles Laughton. But Stanley Ridges came out of nowhere and just was so memorable in the film, the way that he kind of slipped into that kind of gangster mentality was fantastic. I really enjoyed the film quite a lot, actually. And I really like how Karloff played this Sovak character. There's a particular scene where, you know, he's kind of eking out the Red Cannon personality and stuff, and you can see how he's kind of playing the puppet master. But he then is confronted by Kingsley with this, and he basically sits him down and is like, okay, now you're going to do what I tell you to. You're going to do exactly what I say. And his face changed. There's a brilliant close-up of him. And it's to do with the lighting and the angle, but it's the expression that goes so cold. And he still doesn't feel like a hardened villain. But it's a really intriguing character, I think, Sovak. And then the Red Cannon, George Kingsley kind of double act, I think, is fantastic. So Lugosi is kind of there, you know, he does the mobster thing. It's fine, you know. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, Black Friday. This one was directed by Arthur Lubin. And there's some good kind of supporting parts in there as well. But overall, I really enjoyed it. So 2 for 2 so far. And I was really intrigued to see how I would feel about the third and final film in the set, which is jumping ahead again. So we have kind of a film from each decade. The Invisible Ray, 1936. Black Friday, 1940. And then finally we move to 1951, I believe, with the final film in the set, which is The Strange Door. which is adapted from a Robert Louis Stevenson short story, I think. And I guess I could show you the poster here, but it's kind of obscured by the disc hub. So I'll probably just put that on screen for you to get a better look at some of the posters maybe of The Strange Door. So I was, I was all in for this one because Charles Laughton's in it, and I think that Charles Laughton is just an amazing actor. I've seen him in very few things, but he always commands the screen. And this was no different. This was right from the get-go. I absolutely adored this film. Charles Laughton plays this character called Sire Alain de Maletois. He's this French kind of lord, I guess, sire, sir, whatever you want to call it. And at the beginning of the film, he enters this kind of rough bar. And just from the way that the scene is set, but also the way that he shows you who this character is immediately. The way he saunters into the bar, the way he looks with disdain at the people around him. You immediately know what kind of guy this is. It's a fucking great performance. Right from the get-go, before any dialogue has even come out of his mouth. And we quickly learn that his men are looking for the lowest degenerate they can find to be a potential suitor for his 20-year-old niece. So there's this elaborate scheme that is kind of plotted that gets this one guy who's he's grabbing women and kissing them against their will and stuff. He seems like a drunkard and a womanizer. And Charles Laughton's he's perfect. So they devise this whole scheme. There's a big bar fight, which is very exciting. And then he takes off and thinks he's escaping in a carriage, but really he's being led to the Maletois estate and mansion. And the strange door looms. So he goes inside, and he's now essentially a prisoner of Maletois, who kind of beckons him into his lounge and kind of explains to him how he's going to marry his niece, basically. And again, just the way that Laughton just holds court in this scene as a character and as an actor, I think is just, I was so gripped from the get-go. Some of these older horror movies, my mind drifts a little bit. They can be kind of slow. This one, I was just so engaged in every single scene, and down to the supporting characters. There's some really good nuance going on with some of the minor characters in this film as well. So there's just always something that's interesting to look at in terms of the performances, and the story was just the mystery was fun for me. When we hear these moans from the dungeon, and Maletois is this again the Black Fraser puppet master. This is kind of a trilogy of films about kind of puppet masters, and also kind of the maniacal kind of edge coming out from people who slightly lose their grip on sanity. And Maletois, who is very much it seems like he's a mastermind of many things, but you also get the sense that he's slightly cracked, and I find that just super interesting to watch and really fun. And there's a funny film too. There's some dark humor in there as well. And Boris Karloff plays Voltan, who's this kind of lowly, kind of dungeon keeper who's always kind of listening in behind secret doors and stuff. You keep seeing an eye poking out through a painting, and it's Voltan. But he tends to be quite a sympathetic and heroic character who is trying to help the man who is down in the dungeons. And there's the niece who's there to be kind of the trophy bride, I suppose. Well, not even a trophy bride, because she's really Maletois. He wants to kind of destroy her by making her marry someone who's horrible. But it's kind of the Denis, the man who is kind of brought in to kind of ruin her life. He ends up being kind of a sympathetic and kind of there's a nice arc to his character. They talk in the commentary about how he suddenly just switches to being someone who is a good person and not this kind of degenerate. But I think it does show, for me, the film, that he is just someone who's lost his way. He's turned to alcohol, and he's done bad things, but not terrible things. And now that he's faced with the prospect of this being forced to marry this woman, and he kind of falls for a little bit, and she kind of falls for him, and now it's about them trying to escape this situation together. And I kind of bought it. It might just be that I loved everything else about the film, that I was willing to kind of take the leap, I suppose, on his character. But I think there's quite a nice redemptive arc to what was going on there. There's a little bit about his past and stuff, but I really liked that he played by Richard, I forget the actor's name, Richard Stapley or Stapley. I'll check the booklet now to find the cast list. Richard Stapley or Stapley, I don't know. He was very good. I liked him quite a lot. Charles Laughton, he by nature, he steals the film, but I also thought that Karloff was really, really badass, actually. Towards the end of the film, he does. It's one of those frustrating things because there's this very climactic scene, which I love, but the end game of this movie is so much fun. The way that it's all devised, and it reminds me of a very specific scene in the original Star Wars, but there's this big kind of set piece at the end, which is just fantastic. I love the way it was set up, the way that it was shot, the way that we're cutting back and forth from different places in the castle that's all funneling into this treacherous kind of perilous situation. And Voltan, who by this point has been stabbed, and you think he's died already, but he's holding on for dear life to kind of save the day, and he's got this key that's going to save our heroes, and he's just, the way he's staggering through the dungeons, and he just kind of collapses on the floor, and his hand is kind of waving. He's trying to get up. It's like the equivalent of someone being put in like the figure 4 leg lock in a wrestling match, and they're about to tap out, and they just milk it for like 10 minutes. And it's just with those kinds of like tension filled moments where you want the audience's heart and in their chest, and you want them going, oh my god, even though they know that the heroes are probably gonna survive, and it's very rare that they'll kind of meet a sticky end, but you want them to suspend their disbelief in these moments. And if you don't milk it enough, then they don't buy into it. If you milk it too much, then it just becomes silly. And it became silly for me, and I found myself laughing at it more. Well, I didn't really laugh, but I just kind of shook my head and thought, fucking hell, they're really dragging out this key, like the way his hand is like, just gotta get this, just kept going and going and going. But there was a charm to it as well, I suppose, that they really stretched it out. And I thought Charles Lawton towards the end revealed more of it. Like, he really just builds that character up, where at the beginning you know exactly what kind of a person he is, and then he reveals how much he just loves and relishes being this evil bastard. And then towards the end you see a different side to him, which I thought was fantastic. And there's really nice cinematography in this, so the ways in which characters' faces are framed behind bars in particular I liked. And there's a couple of good scraps in there, some good fight sequences. I just loved it. I loved everything about it. The more I talk about it, the more I think back on it and think it was fucking great. I really loved The Strange Door. Yeah, so for me, it makes the set for me. I really like the concept of the kind of the Twilight Zone-y Black Friday, and the kind of the science fiction-y kind of slants, and kind of the, preceding the Atomic Age kind of fear storyline with the Invisible Ray. But The Strange Door, it was just gothic fun, and it makes me want to watch more Charles Lawton. It makes me want to watch more Boris Karloff. It makes me want to watch more gothic horror movies, of which there are in the MOC collection. I mean, right by my fingertips, I still have sealed on the shelf The Old Dark House, which features Charles Lawton and Boris Karloff. So, there's lots of potential there for me to dive into more of this stuff, and I think I will go and check out at least the Karloff at Columbia set. So that's the films. We'll now talk about the Blu-ray itself, and the special features and what you get. Because I enjoyed the film so much, I did listen to all 3 of the audio commentaries, and I really found them quite informative and interesting and enjoyable. And the fact that these are all very short movies meant that the commentaries kind of breezed by as well. So all films are presented from 2K scans from the original film negatives, and so all 3 of them I thought looked really good, particularly The Strange Door, and that's probably due to the age of the elements used. I think The Strange Door looked fantastic. I forgot to mention there is a great cameo in The Strange Door from Alan Napier, who I love. He's just such a fun actor, and he has a really fun little bit part in the film that I really enjoy. It's like Alan Napier, like that was just, I love. It's similar with Beulah Bondi in The Invisible Ray. It's fun to see these actors who you know and like pop up in films that you're watching, old films especially. So yeah, I think the way the films looked on the Blu-ray was fantastic. The 3 audio commentaries we have, I'll talk about those in just a second. There's also, I think, 3 radio adaptations of The Sire de Maletoir's Door. So these are radio dramatizations of the short story that The Strange Door was based on. I think there's 3 of them. And then there's stills galleries for all 3 films, in which you get production stills in one gallery, and then posters and other ephemera in the other gallery. So it's like, release posters, foreign posters, VHS covers. Those I really enjoyed looking at, was the VHS covers. You kind of get a sense of what these films look like on a shelf, you know, decades ago, and, you know, previous home video formats. And I like production stills, especially from older movies as well, so I like that they include those on the disc as well. There's a couple of trailers, and I'm always fascinated to see trailers from older movies because it's just really intriguing to see how they market and push and promote those films at the time that they were made. So I'm all for those being included. Those were in standard def. And yeah, so then there's the 3 commentaries. So the commentaries that we get 2 different teams. So Kim Newman and Stephen Jones take up the commentating duties on The Invisible Ray and The Strange Door. And then in the middle with Black Friday, we have Jonathan Rigby and Kevin Lyons, I want to say. Yes, Kevin Lyons. So 2 different pairings, I would say. I'm growing accustomed now to Kim Newman and Stephen Jones as a double act on the commentaries. It's breakneck with them. They've got so much to talk about. They focus less on like what's going on screen and more just like, you know, here's like this actor who appears in the film for 20 seconds, like when they died, what are the films that they did, who they worked for, what studios they're at, you know, like this actor who's in the film for 2 minutes. Well, he originally started out on Broadway in 1920, so they go into all these like exhaustive details, and they frequently kind of like shit on some of the acting as well, which is kind of funny. And there's a lot of like, I think so-and-so would have been a much better actor for this part. So I enjoy their kind of exhaustive kind of researching and knowledge as well, and their experiences with seeing some of these films decades ago and the different, you know, ways in which they would have done that in either screenings or just on television when these films were shown on TV. And then the team of Jonathan Rigby and Kevin Lyons is a little bit different, but still very informative. And I really enjoyed their commentary on Black Friday, where they talk a lot about what I just mentioned with the casting kind of dilemma, issue, quandary, where Boris Karloff pulled out of playing the lead character basically in the week before they were making the movie, how they had to change everything. And there's another interesting story from Black Friday, which Jonathan Rigby was disgusted at, which was it was brought up in the press when Black Friday came out that Bela Lugosi was hypnotized to act better in the film, which apparently was complete nonsense. But he found it very just disgusting slander that this was leveled against Bela Lugosi. And I will say, it seems like Jonathan Rigby had kind of decided that ignominious was the word of the day, because he used it about 4 times in the span of 2 minutes. I thought, okay, ignominious, I got it. I'll look it up and make sure I know what it means. But I really enjoyed all 3 audio commentaries. I didn't listen to the radio adaptations, though I have ripped them, and I have them on a folder to kind of maybe listen to on a trip down the line. And I'm glad that of all the films, the radio adaptations are from The Strange Door, because I loved it. I'd love to hear different interpretations of that story and adaptations of it. So I'm really glad that's included on there as well. But for me, you get 2 really fun films, 1 great film. I really think The Strange Door is fantastic. And then 3 really good audio commentaries. You get trailers, all the stills galleries and stuff. It's a really, really nice set. I really like the artwork and kind of the different reversible sleeves that we get. So you have an option for, you know, either having the Black Friday and Strange Door posters on the kind of outer case, or just the Invisible Ray. And yeah, so that's really won me over. And of course, there's also the booklet, which has separate essays on all 3 films. And some pictures, obviously. I really like kind of the title pictures for each of the essays. So Radiation Sickness, The Invisible Ray, and Mad Science in the 1930s by Craig Ian Mann. Double Dates, looking back at Karloff and Lugosi's final Universal team-up, Black Friday by Andrew Graves. And this is an example also of one of like the really cool production stills that they included on the Blu-ray. And then finally, Charles Lawton, Strange Doors and Dark Houses by Rich Johnson. And, throughout the book, you get some of those production stills and kind of posters from the movies. Really, really cool stuff. Nice booklet. Really, really, overall, I love this release. I really did. It was one that when I was going through it for the announcement video, I thought, yeah, it looks pretty good. But yeah, I'm so happy with this one. I thought it was fantastic. Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, Stanley Bridges, and Charles Lawton. Some great performances, some super fun films. And The Strange Door, for me, I think will again, now I've talked about how, like, Visible Ray, more of a sci-fi thriller. Black Friday, more of a sci-fi mobster movie, Twilight Zone episode. But The Strange Door, it is the most horror of all of them, for sure. It's very much a gothic horror, but Yeah, I don't know. No, I think it is. I think it is a horror film because the idea of finding yourself trapped in this place with someone as devilish as Charles Lawton's character Malatois, yeah, I would classify it as horror. And so for that, I would say The Strange Door is probably now up there with my favorite horror movies. I can see myself watching this one many more times. So yeah, that's one of those great discoveries. Another thing I love about boutique labels, about collecting Blu-rays, you take a chance on something and it goes all the way back to and I've talked about this before and I'll mention it again and again and again. It goes back to the days of the video stores, like rental Blockbusters. The Ritz was my local as well, and we had Blockbuster too. But the video store, renting a film, going off of just like the cover and a synopsis, and in the case of these boutique labels, you put down 20 quid, say, for one of these fancy releases, and you watch it, and if you don't like it, then you can sell it on, and maybe you lose a couple of quid, and you've essentially rented it. Or if you like it, you keep it. It's almost better than just renting it from Blockbuster or whatever. But I just love that kind of, and sometimes for me it is looking at a cool cover of a Blu-ray or just a synopsis that sounds interesting, So yeah, I'm thrilled with this release, really happy with it, and we'll definitely be diving deep now on Boris Karloff in particular. And with the previous review talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I really want to get into some more Charles Lawton stuff. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you've seen these films, let me know what you think down below. If you got this release as well, or any other recommendations you have for like Boris Karloff films, Bela Lugosi films, Charles Lawton, I'd love to hear them. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.